I want to start a little bit about what I learned from my 10 years at Harvard Business School, teaching, being a professor and doing research there. And it's this idea that I want to talk about. It's called decoupling. There's so many opportunities in the Nigeria ecospace. The beautiful thing of Nigeria versus the US or China is many of the opportunities are still there for you to grab because others have not identified it. So I hope that my framework will help you identify opportunities and work to get it, work to plant your flag, work to make Nigeria a much more prosperous economy.
Thank you so much. This is a Startup Masterclass with Dr. Thales Teixeira, which is looking at from problem to profit, how to spot and scale disruptive ideas in Africa's digital economy. And just a quick background about me and Dr. Thales, who will be anchoring or facilitating this masterclass. My name is Maxwell Igwogu. I'm a startup attorney and a founder of Max & Well Solicitor, which is a startup-focused law firm. And as you would know, the convener of Startup Evening, which is a platform where we share the legal mechanics of doing business in Nigeria with startup, and from time to time we'll bring in resource persons who are established in their field to share the mechanics above the legal aspect of doing business in Nigeria. I'm also an subject matter PhD researcher at the Nigerian Artificial Intelligence Lab, University of Lagos, where I research around the governance of emerging technology around business. And today I have an amazing person, a global expert on digital disruption. Just a few background about him so you know the kind of person that is before you today. For 10 years before he joined University of California as a professor, he was at the Harvard Business School for 10 years as a professor, where he consulted for most of the global tech giants you know today, Facebook, Airbnb, and a whole lot of tech giants and people that are disrupting the economy and the digital space today. He's also the co-founder of digital disruption consultancy, Decoupling Co., and an author of an amazing book, Unlocking the Customer Value Chain. This is a book that if you're in business or you want to be in business, you should get. You should use this book. And finally, the thing I would like to spotlight again about him is that he is a judge at the CNBC Annual Disruptors 50 competition. And we are so excited and honored and privileged to have this widely sought after global expert on digital disruption with us today to present this masterclass to the Nigerian Startup Evening ecosystem. Thank you so much for being available with us today, and we are grateful to have you. Thank you so much, Dr. Thales Teixeira.
Thank you, Maxwell. Really appreciate the invitation, the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here virtually with you. I speak from Southern California, a city called San Diego, but I've had multiple conversations with Maxwell, and he has promised me that one day I will get to visit Nigeria and see all of the startup actions that is happening in the country. So I look forward to this moment in which I will finally visit the wonderful nation country of Nigeria. It's amazing, right, that today is the Independence Day of Nigeria. So congratulations to all you Nigerians. Without further ado, if you all silence your microphones, please, so I can talk about this presentation specifically that I set up for you. So Maxwell and I have discussed in length, and the idea here that we found most exciting to present today is this of from problem to profit, how to spot and scale disruptive ideas in the African ecospace. So I want to start a little bit about what I learned from my 10 years at Harvard Business School, teaching, being a professor and doing research there. And it's this idea that I want to talk about. It's called decoupling as a concept that has been happening all around the world and in many industries, and how I want to convince you in the next 50 minutes or so that decoupling is driving digital disruption in many industries in many countries in a very similar fashion. But let me start off with my early days at Harvard Business School. I got a PhD at the University of Michigan. Then I joined Harvard Business School as a professor. And when I went there, there was this person that was larger than life called Clay Christensen. He came up with a concept of disruptive innovation. And that was an amazing theory. He wrote many books, one of it called The Innovator's Dilemma. And at the time that I was there, everybody, academics, consultants, startup entrepreneurs, they had this idea that disruption is caused by tech innovations, right? Disruptive innovations would call disruptive behavior in the marketplace. But when I started to think about a few companies that were actually innovators that had created innovative technologies, like Kodak. Kodak created the digital camera in its labs. Nokia created many of the patents that are used in the mobile phone space today. If you're using a Samsung device or you're using an iPhone, has many of the Nokia patents. EMI Scanner created the CAT scanner. And Xerox created many of the technologies for the internet and graphic user interface. These companies, big companies, created a lot of disruptive technologies, but what happened was that kind of something happened to them, and many of them did not survive. Many of them went bankrupt, and Xerox is much smaller than it used to be. So this idea that disruptive technologies are the root cause of digital disruption, I started to question that. Is it really true? If these companies, they created disruptive technologies, but they didn't survive the wave of disruption. Not only that, but CEOs of these big companies, and this is the CEO of Nokia, Stephen Elop, there's a video of him saying, we didn't do anything wrong, but somehow we lost. And this is the market share of Nokia, worldwide Nokia phones. In the early 2000s, it was like 55% of the global phones were Nokia. Now, about less than 1%. Only a few people in a few countries in the world will ever buy a Nokia phone. And look at how fast the market share went down. So this company had digital technologies, but disruptive technologies, but it didn't actually survive. So what is disruption? Disruption is a phenomenon that happens when two elements are put together. A big company, what we call incumbents, imagine this huge tanker, huge market share, loses substantial market share in a short period of time, right? So they lose 10, 20, 30, 40 percentage points of market share in sometimes 15 years, sometimes 10 and even 7 years. And who are the ones that are stealing this market share? Well, these are the startups and the tech companies of today. In a variety of industries, they steal this. So this phenomenon is called digital disruption. Well, when I was studying this, I thought, just like many things in life, I thought that disruption was a phenomenon that happened consistently throughout the years. You know, every few months or years, something happens, some company gets disrupted, another company there in one industry in another country. It was a consistent, continuous phenomenon. And then when I looked at the data and looked at companies that lost big amount of market share, it wasn't the case. Disruption comes in waves. And my book talks about the first wave of disruption called unbundling. I'm not going to have time to explain that. Read the book if you want. And then the second wave was called disintermediation. What I found was this third wave, that there wasn't a name to it. And so I have to look at it and understand what was going on in this third wave that was much more recent. In the past 10 to 12 years, it affected electronics companies, consumer goods, transportation, business services, and many other industries. Now, before I explain to you this third wave, what is characterized by that, I need to explain to you one of the first concepts that I teach at Harvard Business School to the MBA students. It's the idea of the customer value chain. This is the following. If you are living in the US and you want to buy a computer or a television, you go to a retailer called Best Buy. It's the established retailer in electronics. You can evaluate all the TVs or computers. You can choose a TV or computer. You purchase it. They'll ship it to your house, or you can take it from the store, consume and then dispose of it, right? All these activities you can do with Best Buy. If you're around the world and you want to buy beauty products, you can go to Sephora and do all these activities. And Electronics Art is a video game company that allows you to do all these activities. So established companies, you do everything. Think of an established bank. You can do many activities of the customer's value chain. what I started observing is that startups were looking at the customer value chain, and instead of trying to steal customers and do everything just like the established companies, the startups were looking at just one activity in this customer value chain. So a startup, two ladies from Harvard Business School MBA, they were realizing that going to the store, to Sephora every week, to look at beauty products tested, because you could test it in the store, was too complicated, took too much time. And so they created Birchbox, which is a subscription box. You would pay $10 a month, and you would get samples of beauty products, and you would be able to do it at home. So you could evaluate all the beauty products that you wanted. But then if you wanted to buy, you had to go to another company, to another store like Sephora or Amazon or some other place. Birchbox just allowed you to sample the beauty products at home through the subscription, and then you would do everything with another company. Same thing with buying electronics and appliances. Amazon didn't have stores, but it wanted to sell electronics to people. So then you would have to go to Best Buy, a retailer, evaluate and choose, and then pull out your phone, and then you could order it, sometimes cheaper, through Amazon. And then lastly, Airbnb, one of the companies that allowed you to consume homes, like vacation homes, without having to purchase the home, right? So all of these businesses were looking at one specific stage in the customer value chain and breaking apart the chain, what I call decoupling, and doing that for consumers. So what is decoupling? Is the breaking of the links between the customer activities, often by a digital player using digital technologies, that have been traditionally provided together. Established companies do everything. The decoupler goes and does one thing and steals that activity. Let me show you a few more examples of decoupling so you can understand the concept. So there's this, I'm originally from Brazil. This is the city of Rio. Many of my friends want to go to Brazil and buy a digital camera, a very expensive Canon camera. And I say, you know, be careful. It's kind of a developing country. If you go to certain places, you might lose the camera. You might get stolen, very expensive. So I suggest you should get insurance for this camera. That means that in your customer value chain, you need to procure insurance, look at all the insurance companies, read the paperwork, sign up for the insurance, pay for the premium, and then when you come back, you need to cancel it. But this is very, very complicated to do. Most people don't do this, right? They take the risk. So a startup in California called Trove created an app that connects. Whenever you buy anything online, it populates the app with all the things that you own. And when you want to get insurance for something, you can get insurance and you can pay per day. And all you need to do is turn on insurance in the app by swiping it to the right. Then you're automatically protected. And when you come back home, you don't need the insurance anymore. You swipe to the left. You can turn on and off insurance just like swiping, just like Tinder, right? And that allows you to decouple, not have to do a bunch of the complicated things in your customer value chain, easily get insurance. So that is decoupling. In the auto industry, why do we buy cars? We buy a car because we want to drive the car. And then we have to maintain the car, change the tires, change the oil. So a startup called Turo allowed people to share cars with each other. So neighbors can share a car with each other when they're not using the car. So then you can decouple, not have to buy the car, not have to maintain the car. You just essentially drive the car, renting it from a neighbor. You can rent it for a day, a few days. Sometimes I've done it before here in California. The owner of the car will even drop off the car. Insurance is taken care of. The platform, Turo, does everything, makes it very easy. So if you don't want to get ride sharing, but you want to drive the car for some reason, then you would get Turo. Yeah. Turo is for maybe kind of long trips, right? It's too cumbersome if you just want the car for 1 hour or two. But if you want the car for a longer period of time, you can use Turo. But then it's because you want to drive the car, right? If you want just for an hour or two the car, then it's better to use something like Zipcar or other car service companies in which the car is parked around the city, and you use a car to get in the car, you drive it for 1-2 hours, and then you drop it off, right? These are company-owned car, and Turo is cars owned by other people. But if you want to drive the car, that's one of these startups. If you want to be driven, you don't want a hassle of driving, then in many countries, you would use Uber, Lyft, or Didi if you're in China. These are ride-hailing companies if you're going within the city from one place to the other. Now, noticing this, a company, French startup called BlaBlaCar created a version for long trips. If you're going from one city to the other, basically you rent a seat in somebody's car. They're going from one city to the other. Works a lot in India, works a lot in Europe, right? So now you start seeing that there's many different options for consumers. And as this ecosystem grew and competitors grew, my students at Harvard, they created a business called Urban Hail. And basically Urban Hail allows you the following. If you don't know which option to choose, comparing Uber to taxi to any other option, basically what you could do is you can go to the app and put where you are, where you want to go, and then the app will go into these other apps and get the prices and tell you how long it takes for each ride. So that's even another form of decoupling. The app Urban Hail only compares options for you, and then once it tells you which one is the cheapest, you can go and you order, and then you ride or drive in the other one. So you can, as you can see, decoupling is happening again and again, right? The point is that today's most dangerous disruptors, they're not stealing customers, but they are stealing customer activities from the established companies, right? So you still buy a car from General Motors or from Toyota, but you might rent the car on Turo. You still go to the retailer, and then you might buy from Amazon. So these are the sharing that I'm talking about. Obviously, this is a big problem for the incumbents, but the thing is happening is some activities are being broken apart and shared by different companies. So as I was doing this research and thinking about decoupling, I started to ask my question, well, how many different types of decoupling are out there? Is it just one type? All across the world, there's one type, or there's many different types? Well, to answer this question, I started thinking more deeply about the customer value chain. So imagine a customer value chain of somebody buying a mobile phone or headphones, right? There's some activities, like you become aware that you need something. You do shopping, you compare options, you choose a brand, you pay for it, you use it, and then you dispose it. You sell it or throw it away. Well, once I realized this, I started thinking that these activities can be classified into one of three types. Some are value-creating activities. So using the product creates value for me as a consumer. Becoming aware that I need a product or service is a value-creating activity for me. So for example, if I become aware that I need to do a surgery, or I become aware that I need to do a course in AI, or I become aware that I need to buy life insurance, that creates value for me, that activity by itself. There's some other activities that are value capturing, the way that the company captures money from me. And all the other activities are what I call value eroding activities. These are activities that I don't like to do. It doesn't create value for me in and of itself, but I have to do it in order to do the value creating activities. So think about going to a store. That activity for most people is value eroding. Staying in line at a store, checking in, reserving a table, reserving a hotel room. I have to do some work, but that activity alone erodes value for me, is not a value creating. So once I realized that any product or service that people are buying can be classified into value creating, value capturing, value eroding, I realized that there's only three different types of decoupling in any industry that you think about. If you're stealing an activity, you can steal a value creating activity, steal a value capturing activity, or steal a value eroding activity. So anywhere in the world, any industry, there's only three types of activities. And all you can ever do for the benefit of your customers are one of three things. You either create more value in the value creating activities, or you reduce value charging activities, making it cheaper for them, or you eliminate value eroding activities, eliminating things that don't create value for people. So streaming, not having to go to the video rental store, is eliminating a value eroding activity. Doing online banking, eliminating a value eroding activity, and so on and so forth. So if you want to acquire customers, there's a million ways to do that in your industry, but there's only three different avenues that you can go about doing that. You're either thinking about creating more value, value-creating activities, reducing value-charging activities, or eliminating value-eroding activities, right? And so when I started looking at different startups that were doing these different things, I started trying to understand what is the value of these businesses. So Twitch and video games is a value-creating activity decoupler, Viber, Skype, WhatsApp, all are decoupling value-creating activities. When I looked at value-eroding activities, eliminating activities that people don't get value from, Dollar Shave Club, Steam, Rent the Runway, Fresh Direct are examples of these types of startups. And then lastly, the value capturing decoupling like Zynga, Ipsy, Spotify, and Dropbox are eliminating value charging activities, value capturing activities. And so when I did a more extensive study with many different startups that were decoupling different types, and I averaged the market value, the valuation of these businesses using 55 companies that were doing very different strategies for decoupling, I realized that here is the average, and then these lines are standard deviation to get the variation around these averages. So you can see here that the most valuable companies to investors, because that's the market value of these companies, these are still private companies, most of them, value creating decouplers are more valuable to investors, have a higher valuation. Then comes value charging, and then lastly, value eroding decouplers. So think about in your head, why could this be the case? Investors value more this type of disruption than, and then lastly, the value eroding disruptor. In my book, I have a little bit of a conversation about this, but this is something that I don't fully understand yet, to be honest. I just wanted to understand the pattern. I have a few ideas you might have as well. We can talk about it later. But the point is, regardless of the industry, because this analysis was done across industry, there are only 3 types of decoupling, and the investor markets seem to value them quite differently from each other. So to the extent that you're thinking about doing a decoupling as a disruption strategy for your startup, you should be aware of this, right? Now, just because you create a startup that is trying to decouple doesn't mean you're going to be successful at it. Doesn't mean you're going to acquire customers. So the next question in my mind when I was doing this research is, how does it work? How can I actually steal customers, right? What's going on here? Understanding customers a little bit better so I can increase the chance of success of my startup. And going back to the beauty industry here, and I have very little knowledge about the beauty industry, so you can see that I will make it a simpler analysis than it actually probably is. But Sephora is the biggest. It's owned by LVMH, big French conglomerate. You go to the store, and then you can sample the beauty products at the store. So that's one activity that people generally do, going to the store. Once you sample and you like the cream or you like the makeup, you can make your first purchase. And then afterwards, you can come back and replenish. You buy it again and again and again. You know where it is. You know where to find it. You know what brand it is. So they provide the expertise and the simplicity for you to do what we often call one-stop shopping. You do all these things with one company. And people who do that, they are forced by what I call integration forces. These are forces that act on the consumer to try to get them to do everything with one company. So if you go to a supermarket and you buy all your week's things in one supermarket, you're being forced by integration force. If you have one bank and you have your checking account, your saving, your investment, your mortgage, you're being forced by integration forces to do everything with one company, one bank. At the same time, there's opposing forces that are trying to, what I call specialization forces, that are trying to pull the customer apart, right? And these are the forces that act on when you're trying to do decoupling as an entry strategy. If you like convenience, don't go to the store. I want to sample at home. Then you use what I talked about, Birchbox or Ipsy or many others. There might be a Nigerian version of that because there's all around the world. Now, you can sample there with one company, and then you go and buy the full-size item elsewhere. For example, Amazon, because the price is cheaper. And then when you want to replenish, you can do, there's a company called Kiehl's that offer beauty as a service, a subscription to certain products, so you can replenish and not have to go to the store and buy it every time. So you see, the decoupling, any customer in any business, in any industry, is being pulled apart by decoupling forces to break the customer value chain, as well as they're being kind of forced together by integration forces. Some will choose to do one-stop shopping, one bank for everything, and others will say, well, I want to have my checking account with one startup in fintech, and then my savings with another, and payments with another, and so on and so forth, right? So the point here is, when I look at customers and I tell my students, okay, you're trying to do decoupling to try to steal customer activities. This is the way you should think about it. Your target customer will pay for that activity, will pay for that product or service that they do with what you want to offer. They often pay with three currencies. One is a physical currency, but the other two are kind of virtual. Consumers will pay with money, they pay with their time, and they pay with their effort, right? So we are actually, as consumers, we're going about the world saying what we want to buy, what products and services we want to buy, and we end up paying with our money, with our time, and our effort. And decoupling will work if you can save the customer on one of these three currencies, so to speak. Possibly, if you can save on all of them, that would be even better. So if you make it cost reductions at each stage of the customer value chain, monetary time and effort will dictate whether consumers will choose to decouple or not. So if you can find a model and you say, there's an activity the customer has to do. For example, comparing which car they need to buy. If you have to go to each manufacturer's website and then go to the dealer, that's a lot of time and effort to go one by one to compare cars. And so all around the world, there's these businesses that say, hey, go to our website and we'll show you all the cars and the prices and everything in one website. So much more convenient. Can save at least time and effort, and sometimes they can even save you money in the process of buying the car. And then people choose to do decoupling. I will choose which car I buy with one business, and then I go and buy the car with another business, with the manufacturer or the retailer, right? So disrupting with decoupling, when we put together all of these things, I started realizing that all the lessons that I learned, if I put them together, I could eventually identify a recipe for decoupling. Now, recipes don't guarantee success, right? A recipe for cake will never guarantee the cake will taste great. But what is a recipe? A recipe is a series of steps that you should follow and a series of ingredients that you should add at each step. And if you do that, the chances that the cake will taste great will be higher, right? But not guaranteed. So if you follow this recipe and you lose money and you don't succeed, please don't come back to me and say, Thales, the recipe doesn't work. It was a failure. The recipe is meant to try to reduce the risk, okay? So here's the recipe. And this is all putting together what I just told you. First, map out the customer value chain. Identify a customer. I want to target, stay-at-home moms, or I want to target small businesses. I want to target the government, okay? What is the value chain of these customers? Map out all of them. Second, identify the type of value of each activity. Is it a value-creating activity? Does it create value for customers? Does it erode value from customers? A necessary evil, something that we have to do but we don't like staying in line, going to the store, submitting documentation, all these things that erode value? Or is it a value-charging activity? Do I have to pay or subscribe to it? But then, point number 3, you are trying to find the weakest link. These activities, probably another company does it for your customer, and you're trying to find where customers are unsatisfied, because that is your opportunity to build a business where customers are unsatisfied, because there's an easier chance that you will steal that activity. If everybody's super happy with that activity, with all of the companies, you're going to find it really, really hard to steal that activity. So find this weak link is important, and then you're going to try to break the chain and steal that activity. How do you do that? By reducing monetary time or effort costs. Make it cheaper, faster, easier for the customer to do that activity. And if you find a way to do that by the powers that be, ultimately some customers will start coming to you for that activity. And then lastly, you're breaking something that belongs to somebody else. If you've ever broken something by somebody that belongs to somebody else, particularly when they're a powerful individual or a company, they're going to respond and retaliate. So you need to anticipate how they will respond. And in my book, I talk about the most typical responses of established companies to decoupling and how to anticipate what they might do and do something in response. Okay, so this is basically the recipe. So let me just show you a few examples of former students of mine that use this recipe to create a decoupling startup. All right, so if you go to the doctor tells you to do a test, a urine test, a saliva test, a blood test. Going to the lab is a value-eroding activity. I have to waste time and go and waste money to go to the lab to get tested, and getting tested is what creates value for me as a patient. Well, one of my former students wanted to lower the cost for people to get tested with all sorts of type of lab tests. So this is Julia Cheek. She created Everly Well, and basically she said she created a business that has all of these tests. It's a test kit business that allows you to test. So there's STD test, vitamin D test, cholesterol test, food sensitivity test, testosterone, women's fertility, all of these things. So when a doctor tells you you need to get tested, instead of going to the lab, you can go to her website, order the kit, and then it explains to you how to put a drop of blood or saliva, a little bit of urine, package it, and send it back to her by mail. Then what does she do? Is she going to build all of these labs that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to test this? Of course not. She gets this material and sends it to the traditional laboratories to do the test. The laboratories do the test and give her the results of the test, and she gets it and she posts it online, both for the patient and for the doctor to see. In that regards, she was able to get it much easier and faster than if you just go to the lab. And she's been disrupting the labs industry by doing this decoupling process, right? And she grew hundreds of millions of dollars of VC funding. Her business exploded during the pandemic, obviously, and now it's doing very well. And she has more than 50 different tests that you can do at home. Very convenient for people who have a hard time, who aren't close to a lab. So attempting to disrupt with decoupling requires this 5-step approach that can be used in virtually any industry. I've worked with many companies around the world in many different industries to practice how to do that, how to use this recipe for decoupling. And it allows us a much clearer way of thinking about disruptive opportunities. And by the way, if you want to I use this this tool in the form of this online form that you can follow each of the steps. You write up the activities, circle which type of value, find a weak link, figure out how to reduce monetary time and effort costs. So later on, if you want to download for you to practice with yourself, with your co-founder, with your students, with your partners, you can just download it from here and use this 5-step approach to kind of think in a much more structured fashion how to find decoupling-based opportunities. All right, so I'm an academic and we love puzzles. And one of the biggest puzzles that I had working, trying to understand the rise of disruptive startups, is why do startups exist? Because conceptually, if you think about it, there's big companies in the market. They have a lot of people, a lot of resources, a lot of money, and they have experience because they hire people within the industry. But startups often the founders don't have experience, don't have money in the beginning. They don't have all the resources, right? And so the question in my mind was how can startups grow and become big? How do you create something like Uber or Amazon or Airbnb? These businesses, these founders, they didn't have experience, they didn't have much money, and they became giants, right? How did they exist? They shouldn't exist, yet they do. And they find ways to kind of grow and become the giants of their industries, right? And the answer that I've come to realize is this: it's decoupling. Instead of building all the pieces of the business, instead of building an entire bank, building an entire retailer, building a car manufacturer, these businesses, these entrepreneurs, they find the broken pieces of the industry, where people are unhappy and they just build that part. And then they add that to the rest of the ecosystem. So they're building one activity or two activities at a time and connecting them all together to satisfy the customer's need. But they just focus initially on this. And so decoupling is the way to explain that. And when I learned about that, that was like a big aha moment, a big surprise that I realized that's the way it works, right? Disruption happens by starting with one activity at a time and improving for the customer that activity and then growing from there on. So this big insight was the way to explain that, right? And then after that, I started asking the question, so what happens afterwards, right? What happens after a startup steals one activity and decouples? Well, after decoupling, if we looked at it, just to give an example of one of these big startups that grew really fast, Alibaba in China, we can see what they did, right? So this is Jack Ma. And in the beginning, he created Alibaba as a business-to-business startup. And then obviously from 2003 to 2008, he created a business-to-consumer e-commerce company. Then a consumer-to-consumer e-commerce company, Taobao and Tmall. But let's see what he did afterwards by expanding Alibaba. He created an app that allows buyers and sellers to chat called Ali Wang Wang in 2004. Because in China, there's a lot of negotiation. E-commerce is not just press a button and buy. Then he created a fintech that allows people to pay for goods and services online, which was called Alipay, and then became a separate business called Ant Financial. Then he created a search engine for products called eTao in 2010. 2011, he created a business that was browsers and operating systems for mobile phones called AliWang. Then he created a consortium of delivery companies, last mile delivery companies called Kanyao in 2013. And then lastly, 2015, he purchased and then improved a device manufacturer called Meiju. So if you can see here, what was going on was, first what started with decoupling, eventually Jack Ma started adding pieces to his business empire that eventually spanned all of the customer value chain for somebody that is buying a product online. You need to have a device. You need to have a browser to search online. And then you need to search for the product. Then you buy the product. Then you talk to the seller. Then you pay for the item, and then you get it delivered. This process of growing after decoupling is what I call coupling in the book. So decoupling, the entry strategy, and then coupling is how to grow by capturing more and more activities in the customer value chain, until today Alibaba would be seen as the major incumbent in e-commerce because it has all the activities in the customer value chain. So just a way to think about how startups end up growing, right? So now I want to talk a little bit about, now that you understand the concept of decoupling, how it works, why it helps startups to enter markets, disrupt markets, and grow. The next question is, okay, Professor Teixeira, now how do I actually find a weak link in an industry that I can understand where customers are unsatisfied and try to exploit that to create a startup around that? How do I identify this, like the key aspect, which is finding weak links in industries? How do I find decoupling opportunities, right? Imagine there's a customer value chain here, and these are very simplified. Shopping, choosing, acquiring, using, purchasing. Basically, what you need to find is, for example, find a weak link where for a certain industry or a business, established business that is in the market, you're able to find either the net promoter score or the satisfaction or any measure of customer satisfaction, but not for the company, but for each activity in the customer value chain. If you can find this curve of the market or the curve of the big player in the market, like a big bank, and see where customers are unhappy, that might be an opportunity for you to say, hey, let's build a business around this and steal this customer activity because that's where customers are unsatisfied. So how to do that? There are not many options. There's only a few options to do that I've seen to get that information, to identify the industry weakly. The first is surveying target customers. This is what most would do. This is what I would recommend you do, right? If you find an industry in which you think of customers, create an online survey, create an offline survey, go survey them and ask them questions about, in a bank. What don't you like about your bank? What do you like? Are you satisfied with the checking, the savings, the ATM, the card, getting the credit card, getting the debit card, using this, making payments, all of these things? Just survey target customers by each activity that they do. And then eventually you'll figure out where customers are most unsatisfied. So there's not much to say here. Just, go do the surveys, survey these people, and you eventually create this curve by getting satisfaction or net promoter score by each activity in the customer value chain. So that's kind of the easy way, not much to say. I'm going to show you a little bit how I do. And by the way, I used to do surveys a lot. Until a couple of years ago, this was my main goal. I was hired by a startup or a big company to understand the weak links. This is what I would do: online surveys with customers. But in a few years ago, I started using online reviews because I found it to be more effective. Let me give you an example of a client of ours, right? This is buying an appliance. If you bought a washing machine, a dishwasher, or a refrigerator, this is the customer value chain that we mapped out. And how do you do that? Combination of experience, understanding customers, and doing the process, right? So you can see here that before in this presentation, I was just giving you very simple customer value chain steps. In reality, these are like 15 to 20 steps. Bunch of steps in needing, decided that you need an appliance, comparing option, visiting showroom, comparing, read online reviews, choosing the model, the retailer, confirming availability, decide what service you need, making the purchase, negotiating delivery, installation, disposing of the packaging, ordering and replenish soap and other filters, and then returning the item. Not everybody needs to do these activities. But we wanted to know in the appliance industry for our client, how do we identify the weak links? Basically, what we did is we looked at online reviews. And this is the online review of a person who bought a brand of washing machine. And this person says, now that the washer is hooked up, it works excellent. And then it says other things. And he says, he told us, the vendor told us that for every $1,000 spent on this brand, there's a promotion to receive discount. And then here, now that the new pedestal has arrived, it's sitting on my dining room, there's no way I can lift it. Installation was a problem. So you can see here that this one review for one person and one product has aspects of first usage, has aspects of negotiating or applying the discount, has aspects of delivery and of installation. And then we thought, okay, if we get a bunch of reviews, we can parse out the reviews and we can associate it with activities. But then how do we get the numbers? How do I understand these texts and transform text into actual satisfaction scores? Because we have a bunch of reviews. Now we start getting customer complaints about rescheduling, lack of updates, and cancellation. All of these reviews, we created a platform using our own AI tool to transform this into numbers. And with that, we created our own Gen AI solution called Decomposer AI that allows us to ingest all these reviews, parse it out by activities in the customer value chain, and transform it into numerical scores. And with that, we created graphs that showed in the x-axis all these activities in the customer value chain, and getting each review and asking our AI tool to transform that text into a satisfaction score that goes from 0 to 10. And when that satisfaction is above 8.5, we've learned over experience that customers are highly satisfied with that activity. Between 7.5 and 8.5, they're tolerant to satisfied. Between 7 and 7.5, they're unsatisfied. And below 7, they're highly unsatisfied and looking for another company to do business with next time around. So here it is, just for a few of these brands. We did it in the appliance sector with many, many brands here in the United States. I'm showing you the graph of a few of the brands, Samsung, GE, and Whirlpool in the US, and the industry average, the average of all of these industries. So you can see the dotted line. And now with this data we collected, we can start seeing, where are the weak links? Where are activities that consumers are most unhappy, and which brands are consumers most unhappy with? right? So to take an example here, this is the industry average, and this is the brand A. I'm not going to review which brand it is, but when the brand A, you can see here in scheduling the delivery of the appliance, consumers of this brand are much less satisfied with the average of the industry. So we've identified weak links here by looking at the curve of average decomposed NPS scores. With online reviews, we were able to ingest this and transform it into numerical data. Now, we created this online platform. You can say, oh, how am I going to do that? Capture the reviews and figure out a way to kind of transform that, get people to help you, or even kind of subjectively transform that into a numerical score. Do a simplified version of what we do here with our AI. And with that, we started evaluating what is the frequency of complaints in that activity of scheduling delivery. And we realized the biggest complaints is people can't reschedule easily. The second biggest is lack of updates on the delivery company. Last-minute cancellations, refunds if they fail to delivery, and then missed delivery schedule was the last one. These are the top 5 complaints for scheduling delivery of washing machines, right? So then that was the way that we used online reviews to capture this and identify weak links as opportunities. And we found for client, hey, delivery of appliances is not well. It's not hooked up. It's not online. Lots of consumers have problems. That's an opportunity for decoupling the market. Now, the third option, and to be honest, many entrepreneurs actually don't do surveys. They don't collect online reviews, although I think they should. But the last option that you can do is just live the experience, right? Many of these founders of successful startups, Uber, Etsy, and Airbnb, really successful startups, these guys, they did not do extensive surveys, or so they say they didn't do it. What they did is they saw it, they heard it, or they felt it. These are people that experienced the pains of, for example, having to hail a cab in a big city, or selling crafts, or trying to stay in a hotel when it was packed, and trying to find a cheaper alternative. So many entrepreneurs, they just experience this and they identify, they feel the pain of the customer by themselves. And this is not a scientific way to do it, but to be honest, many startups, that's the way they come about. They feel the pain of not being able to solve a problem, and that's how they identify weak links in industry. To give an example of this founder, David Vélez, he's the founder of Nubank, a digital, what we call a neobank in Brazil, valuation of $50 billion. He had zero experience in banking, never worked in a bank before. He had no prior startup experience, never did a startup before. He was not wealthy. His first round of funding was $2 million. Sounds like a lot of money, but to build a bank, that's not much money. And he actually identified a weak link in the Brazilian banking system, which he's not even Brazilian. So that shows you how powerful this framework is. So the customer value chain, you have to open a checking account, open savings account, apply for a credit card, use ATM, checks card, and then invest your money. What David realized that these big companies, these big banks, would do all these activities, but the most painful activity for consumers were applying for a credit card. It took many days. You would have to go to the bank. You would have to submit documentation of your salary. The bank would take 2 to 4 days to evaluate whether they will give you a credit card or not. And then after that, they would ship the card. It would take 3 days to arrive. A week to get a credit card. What David created was initially a startup that said, we will give you a credit card in about 2.5 minutes. We'll take you 1.5 minutes to tell you whether we're going to give you a card or not based on data collected from you. 2.5 minutes, and if we say yes, we'll give it in an additional minute, we'll give you the digital number so you can start making purchases online, and then 2 days later you get the physical copy. He essentially created a business by identifying a weak link in credit card and building Nubank to start off with offering credit cards. And then after that, what he did was go from each other activity as the business grew and then it grew by this process, just like Alibaba did, by coupling other activities. And today, Nubank is one of the most valuable neobanks in the world, and definitely much more valuable than many banks in Brazil. So the point is, one of the key takeaways is disruption equals breaking something. Disruption is not necessarily equal technology. Technology is important. I'm not going to say it's not. But disruption is about breaking something. And in my view, it's about figuring out the customer value chain and breaking it and stealing an activity. That's how it works. Now, decoupling is also the beachhead. It's the way for you to enter the market. So think about the battle is in the customer value chain, figuring out how to enter that, find that place where there's weakest defense mechanisms and go there and acquire customers there. That's some of the key takeaway of this lecture. So basically, that's it. This is me. I talk a little bit about my book and Maxwell also. It's called Unlocking the Customer Value Chain. I hope this was helpful, and we might have a little bit more time for questions and answers if there's anybody that wants to ask anything. But thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, yes, Prof. Thank you very much for this presentation. It is well taken and clear. But I have a question regarding emerging economies like Nigeria, for example, and some other African countries, where a number of activities are not standardized as you have it, for example, in the US, right? Yeah. And this value chain, most of them are still traditional. Most of them are still in the raw form. Do you think this model will work? And do you see a kind of stumbling block in decoupling most of these things when, for example, the infrastructure is not there? For example, let's say the internet is not everywhere. Some people are not even banked. Most people are not banked. They keep their money cash and so do you see this working also in such environment? And what are your thoughts? Thank you very much for this.
My pleasure. Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's very valid, right? That decoupling works better when there is a infrastructure available for you to tap into, and that's why governments, some of the role of governments, and I advise some governments, particularly in South Korea, is to make available this infrastructure, invest in the infrastructure. Governments shouldn't invest in startups, they should invest in the infrastructure that allows many entrepreneurs to create businesses where they can tap into to the necessary. And the infrastructure here, I mean, internet connectivity, cloud computing, software, software as a services that the entrepreneurs can, instead of having to develop everything, they can just pay per month and get access to all of these things. So definitely, I would say that in some cases, if the infrastructure is not available, entrepreneurs need to play the long game, which is imagine where the infrastructure will go, that eventually Nigeria's infrastructure will kind of be developed. And if you start sooner, you can build a business for the time when things come, right? So you can start building it. By the time that digital bridge becomes completely manufactured, you will have an early access to that. So you should be careful with just the wait and see approach, and realize that obviously you need to build something that creates value for customers now, but have a vision on what are you trying to build for the long term that will create the maximum amount of value for the maximum amount of customers, and that the infrastructure is probably being built as you're building your startup. So that's much more tricky. And so that's why I say being an entrepreneur in Brazil or an entrepreneur in Nigeria or an entrepreneur in another developing country is much harder because you have to learn where the market is going, where the infrastructure is going. So yeah, that's a big challenge.
Thank you very much. There's also another question here from Eukaria. She says, can this work for service-based business startups? And how can this be?
Absolutely, absolutely. It can work for service-based businesses because you can offer the service online. If you can offer the service online or partially offline, you're doing that, right? So Uber is a service-based business. Uber could say, well, we could buy cars and own cars and do a taxi business. They didn't do it. They just decided to essentially match drivers and riders. So it's a service. Airbnb is offering a service to rent homes. Obviously, there's a physical asset underlying it. But there's many other services that don't rely on any asset necessarily, right? If people have a bunch of problems. For example, people need to compare let's say, travel. Where should they go to? Or what travel agency they should use? Or which airline should they buy a ticket? People need to compare, for example, when they're buying something expensive, like a house or a car or buying software, and you could offer a service of comparison of all of these options. So that is decoupling as well. You could create a website that compares these different types of services and offering that to customers. If you're offering service to other businesses, you could also use technology and use decoupling as the business model innovation. So I always think about, you should think about the customer needs, where they're unhappy. You should think about the business model. How are we going to make money out of this offering, this service or this activity? And then what is the technology that we need to be able to offer this service and offer this value? So it's always three things: the customer, the business model, and the technology. But there's examples. And in my book, I offer many, many examples of service-based businesses that can use decoupling.
Thank you very much. One other person has raised his hand. Cosmos, could you please go on? Could you ask your question?
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. I mean, this was very insightful. I'm glad I'm on this call. But I want to ask, I feel that data is one of the most important components of this whole decoupling process, right? And in this our kind of emerging economy, right? I mean, how do we source for the right data that can enable us, kickstart all this whole process?
Yeah, you're totally right. Needing the data, consumer data, satisfaction data. If you're the banks, the neobank requires this thing called open banking, in which traditional banks have to share the data with new banks or new fintechs. Data is key in the online world, and if you don't have the data, you don't have ways to get the data, then pretty much you don't have the intelligence or the capability to deliver a better service or a better experience. So always ask the question, can we get the data? No. If you cannot, one option is, well, why don't we create a business that can capture that data, right? So always thinking about this as an opportunity as well, because other companies might benefit from you being the data provider, you capturing the data. There might be business opportunities there if the data is not available, but you're totally right. Data is the most important aspect. The better quality of data will create better opportunities for you. So thank you very much. Unfortunately, I have to go to my next appointment, but it was a pleasure to be here. Maxwell, thank you so much for gathering so many interested people to attend. I hope this has been of value to you. Keep on learning, keep on striving. There's so many opportunities in the Nigeria ecospace. The beautiful thing of Nigeria versus the US or China is many of the opportunities are still there for you to grab because others have not identified it. So I hope that my framework will help you identify opportunities and work to get it, work to plant your flag, work to make Nigeria a much more prosperous economy. And startups and entrepreneurship are one of the key tools and mechanisms to improve the quality for both investors in your country, for entrepreneurs, and for consumers in your country. And this will actually improve all of the country's resources and capabilities. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much.